On a beach in Ravenna, Italy, thousands of people stood in the rain. They weren't there for a concert. They weren't there for a festival. They were there because a 46-year-old man, retired from professional football for over a decade, was about to walk out and confirm that he was playing again. Think about what that actually means for a moment. This wasn't a stadium announcement, backed by a club's usual matchday crowd, already primed to show up regardless of the occasion. This was a beach, in the rain, for a man who hadn't kicked a ball professionally since 2015. Nobody forced that crowd to stand there. Nobody guaranteed them anything in return except the chance to see, in person, whether the moment was actually real. His name is Ronaldinho, World Cup winner, Ballon d'Or winner, one of the most naturally gifted footballers of his generation. And on this particular afternoon, in the rain, at a third-tier Italian club most casual football fans had never heard of, he was starting something nobody expected him to start again. This video covers two things. First, the career that made this moment possible. Why a comeback from Ronaldinho carries weight that a comeback from almost anyone else wouldn't. And second, exactly what he's actually coming back to, in his own words, and what it might mean. To understand why thousands of people would stand in the rain for this specific announcement, you have to understand exactly what Ronaldinho actually accomplished during his playing career, because the scale of it is easy to lose sight of, over a decade removed from his final match. Ronaldinho won the World Cup with Brazil in 2002. He didn't simply feature on that squad. He scored the winning goal in the quarterfinal against England, a moment that remains, for an entire generation of Brazilian football fans, one of the defining images of that tournament. 3 years later, in 2005, he won the Ballon d'Or, awarded annually to the world's best player. This was the peak of a run that saw him become, by common consensus among players, coaches, and journalists covering the sport at the time, the most exciting attacking player in world football. A status built on a style of play that blended genuine technical brilliance with a visible, infectious joy that made him one of the most watched players of his era, regardless of which club he happened to be wearing. That joy is worth dwelling on for a moment, because it's a specific quality that separates Ronaldinho's legacy from many players with comparable trophy counts. Plenty of footballers have won World Cups and individual awards. Considerably fewer are remembered, over a decade after their playing days ended, specifically for how visibly they seem to enjoy playing the game itself. That distinction matters directly to why a comeback story built around him carries emotional weight that a similarly decorated but less beloved player's comeback simply wouldn't generate. His club career carried him through 3 of European football's most storied institutions: Paris Saint-Germain, Barcelona, where the peak of his Ballon d'Or winning form took place, AC Milan, where he continued playing at a high level well into his 30s. He retired from professional football in September 2015, playing his final official match with the Brazilian club Fluminense, closing out a career that had, by any measure, already secured his place among the sport's most beloved figures. Not simply for what he won, but for how he played the game while winning it. That is the man who, more than a decade later, walked onto a rainy beach in Ravenna. The comeback itself is considerably smaller in scale than the career that preceded it, and that gap is precisely what makes this story worth examining closely. Ravenna play in Serie C, Italian football's third tier. Last season, they finished third in their group, chasing a return to Serie B, a division they haven't played in since 2008. This is not a club competing for major honors. This is a modest, regional Italian side, and Ronaldinho's arrival is, by a considerable distance, the biggest thing to happen to it in years. To put that gap in perspective, this is a man who once shared a dressing room with some of the finest players Barcelona has ever fielded, walking into a club that hasn't played above Italy's third division in nearly 2 decades. That is a considerably larger gap than most comeback stories involve, where a former top-flight player typically moves to a slightly lesser top-flight league rather than dropping several divisions at once. The comeback was first announced back in June by Ignazio Cipriani, an Italian-American businessman who has owned the club since 2024. He made the announcement while attending the World Cup in Miami. Itself a detail worth noting, since it places the initial plan in motion months before the actual public unveiling on the beach. Ronaldinho's role is not simply that of a player. He is becoming a shareholder in the club, tying his involvement to Ravenna in a way that extends beyond whatever happens on the pitch specifically. And there is real uncertainty, by design, about how much football he will actually play. In his own words, addressing the crowd directly, "Will you see me play? I don't know. Only the coach knows that." He will not, confirmed by Cipriani, feature in Ravenna's Serie C season opener against Reggiana. Whatever playing time does materialize will clearly be managed carefully, rather than treated as a guaranteed, regular feature of the club's season. What Ronaldinho did say, plainly, is what he's hoping for if the opportunity does arise. "I'm in shape. I feel good," he told the crowd. "If I could score my 300th goal, that would be even more beautiful." Here is the question sitting underneath this entire story, and it's worth asking directly rather than avoiding it. Is this real, or is this simply a marketing exercise built around a famous name? Cipriani addressed this directly, without being asked to soften it. "His involvement is not a token gesture or a marketing stunt to get people talking about us," he said. "His objective is romantic, to try to score his last goal. That's a specific, deliberate framing. Romantic rather than commercial. And there's a reasonable case that the framing holds up under basic scrutiny. Ronaldinho does not need Ravenna. He is not a struggling former player seeking a final paycheck from a lower division club desperate for attention. He has nothing left to prove, financially or competitively, at any level of the sport. A World Cup winner and Ballon d'Or holder attaching his name to a third-tier Italian club a decade after retirement is not the obvious financial or reputational move for a man in his position. That absence of an obvious motive is exactly what makes the romantic framing more credible than it might sound at first. Athletes who return purely for money tend to attach themselves to situations that pay considerably more prominently than a Serie C shareholding. Ronaldinho, by every available detail of this specific arrangement, appears to be doing something closer to what Cipriani described. Chasing a specific, personal, almost sentimental goal in a division with no real bearing on his existing legacy either way. Consider what a purely commercial comeback would actually look like, for contrast. It would typically involve a higher profile league, a guaranteed run of appearances built into the contract, and heavy promotional activity scheduled well in advance of a single ball being kicked. What's actually been reported here is closer to the opposite on every count. A third-tier club, no promised playing time, and an owner going out of his way to preemptively deny the marketing framing before journalists even had the chance to suggest it. That doesn't mean the club won't benefit from the attention. It clearly will, and clearly already has. A beach event drawing thousands of fans in the rain is not a small marketing outcome for a third-tier Italian side that hadn't reached Serie B since 2008. But a mutually beneficial arrangement is not automatically the same thing as a hollow one, and the specific, modest, uncertain nature of Ronaldinho's actual playing role. No promised appearances, no guaranteed minutes, a coach who alone decides whether he plays at all, reads considerably more like genuine involvement than a stage-managed publicity exercise. There's a broader pattern worth naming here, because Ronaldinho is far from the first legendary player to consider a return once retirement no longer feels final. What distinguishes this specific case is the size of the gap between where he's returning from and where he's returning to. Most high-profile comebacks in football happen within a reasonable proximity to a player's previous level. A former top-flight star moving to a slightly lesser top-flight league, still operating within a recognizable tier of the sport. Ronaldinho's arrangement with Ravenna crosses a considerably wider gap, from Ballon d'Or level football directly into the third tier of Italian domestic football, with no intermediate step in between. That gap is precisely what supports the romantic reading Cipriani offered. A calculated career move, aimed at preserving reputation or maximizing remaining value, would typically avoid a gap this large. A decision built around a specific personal goal. One final goal, at whatever level makes that goal achievable, explains the gap considerably better than any conventional career logic does. There's also something worth noting about what this means for the sport's smaller institutions, beyond Ronaldinho's own motivations. A player of his stature choosing a modest, regional club, rather than a bigger platform that might have offered him more visibility, sends a specific signal about where he's placing value in this final chapter. Ravenna gets, at minimum, a level of national and international attention a third-tier Italian club would otherwise have no realistic path to receiving, regardless of how his actual playing time unfolds. Ronaldinho retired in September 2015, closing out a career that included a World Cup, a Ballon d'Or, and a style of play that made him one of the most beloved footballers of his generation. 11 years later, he stood on a rainy beach in Ravenna, becoming a shareholder in a third-tier Italian club, uncertain himself about how much he'll actually play, hoping only for one specific thing: a 300th career goal and the chance to end his story exactly where he wants to end it. Whether that goal ever actually arrives is not something this video can answer. Ronaldinho himself doesn't know the answer yet. By his own account, that decision belongs entirely to his coach. There's something genuinely rare in that admission, worth sitting with before this video ends. A man of Ronaldinho's stature could easily have demanded guaranteed minutes as a condition of his involvement. He didn't. He handed that decision to someone else entirely and stood on a beach in the rain anyway, willing to let the story unfold however it actually unfolds, rather than however he might have scripted it in advance. What is already clear, regardless of how the football itself plays out, is that thousands of people were willing to stand in the rain for the possibility of it. Proof that some legacies don't require an active playing career to remain genuinely, powerfully alive.